First time I was asked to speak, and I was shy and nervous, and I can't tell you how scared I was when I was speaking to over 300 people for the first time. And after I finished my little talk that I memorized ahead of time, a friend of mine said to me, also a Holocaust survivor, "You know, if they paid me $1 million, I wouldn't have done it." I said, "No, I did not do it for $1 million. I did it for all the people who cannot speak for themselves." And there are so many millions. So I thank you for being here. And I will tell you about a family. My family, because I know best about what happened to my family. But you can multiply that millions of times to all the people that it happened. And it gives me a sense of satisfaction to know that there are people who still want to hear about what had happened, that they want to know, and that these people have not been forgotten. So thank you for being here. I was born in a city in Poland called Lodz. I had 2 younger sisters, and my mom was born in a large city called Lodz. My father in Skarżyska, which was an industrial city, which actually saved my life and many other survivors. I was 10 years old when World War II broke out, and of course our lives immediately changed from a wonderful life that I thought, if only we did not have to eat. We could not, we meaning me and my 2 younger sisters, could not leave the table till we finished eating our meals. And I was one of those that did not like food. As my daughter, who is all the way there in the back, Pauline, did the same thing to me, what I did to my parents. Did not like food. All she wanted to have is milk. And I was terrified that she's going to die of starvation. So I could understand how my mother felt, especially since a best friend of hers, a young woman in her 20s, died of tuberculosis, and she blamed it on the fact that her friend did not eat enough. So when the war broke out, that was a war that broke out between armies. We did not think that it was between armies and civilians, but that's exactly what happened. The Germans were very well armed. When they attacked Poland, within 1 week, Poland was invaded completely. It was only 1 week later they invaded on a Friday, and the following Friday they were in our town, in our city. So it didn't take them long because they were prepared for it. Life completely changed. First of all, the war, as you know, broke out in September, and that's when schools opened. Schools did open a couple months later, but not for Jewish children. Jewish children were not permitted to attend school. That was the very first blow. The second blow, we had to wear white bands on our arms. It was in the beginning, to identify us, that we were Jews. And this identification could lead to a catastrophe, like it almost did with my mom, who was, at that time, my mom and I were 20 years apart, so I was 10 and she was 30. She was walking home after visiting a sick friend, and a Nazi officer on a horse tried to get the horse to kill her, to stamp on her. And we believe the animal refused to do that. He got up on his 2 feet, with the other feet up in the air, refused to do it. When my mother described it, we were just amazed. And an animal would not step on a human being. But this man tried so hard to get that animal. He was beating that animal to crush my mom. So this was just the beginning. Of course, the very next step was forcing us out of our homes into a ghetto, into a small area, very small area. And life, of course, immediately changed. And that was the Skarżysko ghetto, because I lived in the city. The Polish government built large ammunition factory centers, and they brought engineers and chemists and all kinds of people from all over the country to work in these factories. And there were 3 such centers. So when Germany invaded Poland, they took over these factories and they built a concentration slave labor camp next to each one of these factories. Our house, the building where we lived, was right next to a river, and I loved that river. I remember it from my whole childhood, and it was just a joy for me. So when we were forced into the ghetto, there was no river there, and my mom was taken with a group of other women. There were 40 women taken from the ghetto to work outside of the ghetto. And she would come home and describe, the river, the willows that grew, how they were coming along and all that. And when I was 13, I was very tall for my age. Actually, believe it or not, I was taller than I am now. So when I reached 13, I started nagging my mom and my dad to let me go to work in my mom's place. And of course they said absolutely no, no, no. They were afraid for me to get hurt. But finally, one of my sisters was sick and she agreed, my mom agreed to let me go. So the very first time I went and I saw the river, and worked in gardens in the fields, which I could manage. And then after that, my parents did not allow me, but a couple weeks later, they agreed again to let me go. And this time, instead of bringing the group of 40 back to the ghetto, they took the 40 of us to the slave labor camp. So I never saw my dad after that, except for one time. 6 weeks later, my mom was arrested, sent to another concentration camp, another slave labor camps, right outside of our city, because of the ammunition factory centers. They needed free labor, because that's what we were slaves. And so she was arrested and imprisoned in the other camp and worked in the other factories. And my sister, who was not afraid of anything or anyone, and I really mean it, she just had no fear. She did not know fear. And she had a little friend. The boy was maybe 7 and she was about 11. And the two of them would just, if you looked out the window, you would see them walking on the street, singing or jumping or whatever, and they just didn't care if the Germans walked there too. So she escaped from the ghetto and she came to the camp where I was, and she brought me photographs. I'm one of the very fortunate people, survivors. And I know we have some survivors. Helen is one of them. I don't know the others. That have not been lucky enough to be able to save pictures of their own parents. Am I correct? Yeah. I know many Holocaust survivors. They are my friends, but I don't know one that has photographs as I do. So I am very fortunate in that respect. And when I say that, it's especially important to me because I would not have remembered what my parents looked like or what my sisters looked like, even though I was already 13 when I left home. In the very first camp, slave labor camp, I totally lost memory, possibly because of starvation. I don't know what other reasons, but I did not even remember what they looked like. But having these pictures every night, I would kiss them good night before I went to sleep on the boards in the barrack, and it gave me a lot of courage and a lot of strength just to have these pictures with me. And I smuggled, that's the only word I can think of, these photographs through 5 different concentration slave labor camps. I have 2 crushed discs in my back from a beating by 2 Nazi soldiers. They had the rifles that you wear over the shoulder with the butts of those rifles over my head, over my back. I was lucky that they didn't just crush my skull. Because these pictures showed that I was a human being. These pictures showed that these people in these pictures were very nice looking, good looking human beings, and we were not supposed to be human beings. So the 2 of them beat on me and took the pictures, and I had a big pile of this much. My family loved pictures, photographs. So my sisters smuggled them to the camp, and the camp I was in, the first one, had barbed wire, but not like in Auschwitz where they had 1 row of fence and then another row of fence and then another row of fence. If that happened, I wouldn't have had them. There was only 1 fence, and she was able to kind of dig underneath and push them under, and I am just so lucky, thanks to her, that I have, and I have some here I'll show you. My parents worked even though I was already taken away, because one day, the second day that I replaced my mother at work because I wanted to see the river. We were taking the 40 women, instead of bringing them back to the ghetto as they did for a couple of years already. It was already 1942. And remember, the war broke out in 1939. And I was taken in beginning of 1942. This was already the end of 42. I was taken to the first camp and remained there while my mom was arrested and sent to the other camp, because as I say, there were 3 such camps right outside of our city. So she could have been on the other end of the world. I would not have been able to get together with her or hear from her or know whether she was still alive. And as a matter of fact, she escaped from her camp sometime later after the ghetto was deported. All the Jewish people were taken out. And we heard, when I was still home, I always heard these rumors that the Jewish people are going to be sent to the east, where they will live on farms, grow their own food. This is how the Nazis prepared the Jewish people to get on those trains to go where they wanted them to go. Because I'm sure that many would have escaped if they knew where they were really going, that they were going to their death. After my mom escaped from her camp, she put on a white band with a red cross on it, came to the gate of the camp, and told them that she was escorted from her camp with a guard, and that the guard is at the main gate of the entrance to these factories. And he gave only 10 minutes to visit with me, that her daughter is in this camp. Will you please open the gate as fast as you can and call me so she can see me? And he did that. He just followed her words. So when a guard came to our barrack, did not come in, but he yelled, and he yelled my name, I was shocked. And there was a Sunday, so we were not working, just one day a week we had off, and only because the Nazis were off, so there was nobody to see to it that we do work or take us. And so my mom told him to call me, and he went to the barrack and he yelled my name. And when I heard my name, I was terrified. I mean, why would they single me out? And there were young women that were with me. They all looked at me, and the first question was, did you steal something? I said, no, I didn't steal anything. Well, what did you do? Why do they want you? I don't know. I had no idea. So there were 2 steps that you had to come down from the barracks. So as I got onto the step, I saw my mom, and I thought I was hallucinating. I did not believe that was my mom. I used to love to read, so I read a lot of little books as a child and later, and all these beautiful things that happened to people and that they really did not happen. It was hallucinations. And I thought that was happening to me. She came and she had a little brown bag. I'll never forget that little brown bag. And she had 2 potatoes in it. And she handed me the little bag with the 2 potatoes, because in her camp, where she was, there was a factory that made potato chips for the German soldiers on the front. So there were ways where people, well, I guess today you would say stole a potato here or there. We never considered it stealing. We called it organizing, because we worked very hard and we earned to be given good food and not to be starved. So if we could find somewhere a piece of bread or a potato or whatever, and many people just skins of potatoes, they would be fighting over skins of potatoes. We felt that was coming to us. So my mom came, and after a little while I realized that it was not a dream, it was not a mirage, it was my mom. And so she told me that the guard brought her there, and she has just a few minutes to visit, and that she will see me again. Well, I just accepted what she said. It was only years later, when I was reunited with her, when she told me that she escaped from her camp, came to my camp, told them the story of the guard went to the main gate of the factory, and that she had very little time to do all that. And then after she visited with me, she went back to her camp. And till today, I have a difficult time dealing with that. That we were in our hometown. It's not where my mother was born or where my mother was raised, but after marriage, she lived there. And she did a lot of good volunteer work. That there was not one home that she could say it would be safe to go and hide there. But But then again, it was dangerous for someone to hide a Jewish person. So in a way, you can also understand why they did not risk their lives to save a Jewish person. But there are countries like Denmark and Norway where they did risk their lives and they saved many people. Denmark saved most of their Jewish population by taking them to Sweden by boat, and they risked their lives by doing that because the Nazis were looking at all the places on the seas to make sure that nobody was escaping from there to Sweden. So, you know, in my life, I have seen an awful lot of evil. I always say of the depths of evil and the heights of goodness. And I've seen people that risk their lives and really truly risk their lives to save others. So that I had an opportunity to learn at a very young age that there are all kinds of people in this world, and there are good people, and there are some that are not. I was in that camp most of the time until there were 3 camps in that city, in Skoczysko, because there were 3 centers of ammunition. The one I was in was the worst of the 3 because they manufactured poisonous gases there. And we could not have any additional clothing except what was on our bodies. So where the people before the war that worked there would have uniforms and gloves and masks, we had nothing. The same clothes that I was arrested in, I slept in that, I worked in that, that's all I had. I was in the very first camp, the very first December, and I was arrested in August, and most of the people from our town were arrested in September. The terrible disease, typhus, broke out. And it just went from one person to another. It was an epidemic. A lot of people died. The Nazis did not want or were afraid of the typhus to be spreading into their ranks as soon as someone became ill. I mean, it was a new law that started. They set aside a barrack called Barrack Number 7. And Barrack Number 7, where in all the other barracks we were men separate, women separate. In Barrack Number 7, men and women were together, and only the very ill were brought to Barrack Number 7. Before I became sick, my sister escaped from the ghetto, came to the camp on a Sunday. I had told her about one guard who was either from Estonia or Lithuania, I don't remember exactly. But he was not from Germany. But he was of German descent. And he was in the German army, and he was a guard, like a German guard. And whenever I worked in the gardens, and he walked by, he was on guard, he would always stop where I was working, right near the fence. And he would talk with me. He was the only one that ever talked to me. And he would tell me, he must have been in his early 20s, if he was 20 at all. And he told me about his sister, that he had a sister of my age, and told me a little bit about his life. And he would listen to me, and that was very important. His name was Marin, I'll never forget it. Marin. He would allow things that other guards would not. So one Sunday, he was on duty at the main gate to the camp. And my sister came and brought me a pillow because we slept on boards. You know, they said they were bunk beds, but they were not bunk beds, they were just shelves where you could just stretch out. But there was not even straw on those shelves, nothing, no pillows, no linens, not even straw. But we were so tired after work that I remember I did not have the strength to even take my shoes off. I would just lie down and go right to sleep. So when she brought that pillow to the gate for me, there was a guard who was a Jewish policeman. And some of these policemen were just as cruel as the Nazi guards, because having that position gave them food and a lot of things of comfort that we did not have. So he was there and he saw my sister handing over the pillow to me. And he said to her, "I would like to have a pillow like that." She turned to him, she was 11 years old, and she said, "Well, if you take care of my sister," and my name was Hayuta at the time, "of my sister Hayuta, I'll bring you a nice pillow." And she did. She brought him a beautiful pillow. We had pillows that had yellow satin pillowcases, and then they were like organza, is that how you pronounce it? On top was ruffles around it, you know. They were on top of the bed. She brought him one of those pillows. And that was the end of it. I never heard from him. I thought maybe he would help me somehow, but he did not. And I was scared of him because he was very cruel. So I was just as glad that he, did not want to do something for me. But I became ill with typhus. And all the people that were sick with typhus had to go to barrack number 7. When barrack number 7 filled up, when there was enough people to fill a truck would come. Other camp inmates, especially men, would take these people on the truck, take them to the ditches, and they were shot. So this policeman who got the pillow for my sister, his name was Lederman. I don't remember his first name, but I always called him Mr. Lederman. He and another woman, and her name was Hmyelnitska, Mrs. Hmyelnitska. She was the oldest in our barrack. He and with her, I was forced to be taken to barrack number 7. And Lederman did not want me to go to barrack number 7, but he was overruled. I had to go to barrack number 7. And things were pretty terrible in the barracks where we were in everyday life there. But barrack number 7, and as I say, I have not come across any book that even mentions barrack number 7. And the only reason that I can find is that there are no survivors. I'm the only one that survived. And the reason I survived is because Lederman, this man that my sister gave the pillow to, the young women in my barrack went to him and told him that I'm sick with typhus. He says, "You promised her sister you're going to help her. That's why she brought you the pillow. Now, do something." And he assigned a woman from our barrack, the oldest lady, who was 32, because all of them were young girls in their late teens. I was only 13, but I was there because I substituted my mother for work. And thank God she survived. Because when I think, how would I have felt if I went in my mother's place and I survived and my mom did not? I would have never forgiven myself for that. But my mom, for my whole family, just my mom and I survived. when they told him that I was sick, he did come and help me. He brought me soup, he brought me white bread, which I haven't seen for a long, long time. And he assigned this lady, Mrs. Chmielnicka, to help me rather than going to work. He released her from work, and her job was to take care of me. And I must tell you, barrack number 7 was horrible, because there was no bathroom, there was just a bucket in the corner. Most of the people were too sick to reach the bucket. There was no one there to give them a drink of water, and people were very thirsty because their fever was very, very high. And they pleaded for a drink of water. In fact, one man recognized me. My dad was his friend, and he was calling me Miss Feldman. My last name is Feldman. And no one has ever called me Miss Feldman. It was always by my first name. But he called me Miss Feldman, please, give me some hot tea. All he wanted was some hot tea. Well, I was in his shoes. I mean, I could not do anything. In December of 1942, just before Christmas, the guard that stood outside the door of our barrack, of that barrack number 7, must have been either cold and went to get a cup of coffee, or maybe he went to the bathroom, and many of the guards, or some of the guards, were given permission to go home for Weihnachten, which is in German, for Christmas. So they were short on help, and no one replaced him while he went to the bathroom or to get coffee. And someone noticed it on the outside of that barrack, and they ran to Lederman, to the policeman, and told him that no one is at the door of barrack number 7. So he took Mrs. Chmielnicka and a blanket and came into the barrack number 7. And they took me out of there. And people, when they saw that they were covering me with a blanket and getting me out of there, started yelling to me, tell my mom what happened here, tell my friend what happened here, tell my sister, brother. I mean, they were giving me 100 messages. It was so overwhelming that I just passed out. I do not remember leaving barrack number 7. And I don't remember entering a men's barrack. The men were on night shifts. It was an empty barrack. And they hid me underneath one of the bottom of the bunk beds. There were like 3 shelves. 1, 2, 3, where the people slept. So they put me underneath, put a lot of trash in front of me, and left me there. I think it was in the middle of the night. I heard banging on the door of that barrack, and it was pitch black, and I thought I was dead. And I kept thinking to myself, I am dead. How can it be that I can hear their voices? Because they were yelling, rouse, Judah, rouse means out. I says, I am dead. Why do I still hear their voices? And my luck was, and that goes for every survivor, those of us that survived had a lot of lucky incidents to save our lives. And this was one of them. Because they always took their walks with a dog. They always had dogs. It was German Shepherds. But they didn't have a German Shepherd at the time. There were no dogs, because the dog would have snuffed me right out from me. And they came in and they yelled, rouse, rouse, Judah, rouse, Jew out. And of course I didn't answer and was quiet. Nobody was there except me. And they left. And then later, before the men had a chance to come back from work, we work on, as I mentioned, 2 shifts. 7 to 7, 7 in the morning to 7 at night, and 7 at night to 7 in the morning. So before the men returned, Lederman and Mrs. Chmielnicka, whom he assigned to help me, came in, took me out of there, and brought me back to my regular barrack. And I remained in that barrack. But I was typhus. People, the fever is very, very high. You lose most of your hair. Did you have that experience? Yeah, Helen Schwartz also survived. Brought me from that men's barrack back to my barrack. And the Lederman, this policeman, whom I hated with all my heart because he was so cruel to other people, assigned this Mrs. Chmielnicka to take care of me. And he went to the head of the camp, the German head, and told him he has a relative and she has a bad cold. She cannot go to work. Is it okay if he keeps her a couple days in her barrack? And he said, what does he care? One more, one less. And he said, okay. So they left me in my barrack for a couple days. And after those couple days, the inmates in the barrack carried me. And I mean carried me to work every day. That very first job after they took me back to work was sitting at tables, long tables, just like this, only all one, with the conveyor belt. And they had small rockets, small, maybe this big. And our job was to check some markings on them that they were supposed to have, and if they didn't, to take them off. So the lady who sat on my right and one who sat on my left, and the ones right across, did their work and they did my work. They covered both so that I could sit there and we can kind of rest, because I was too sick to be able to work. And they carried me back to my barrack. So some of these people were almost strange. I mean, all of them were strangers, except for one girl who happened to be the older sister of my friend, because she was also 13 and they didn't take 13-year-olds, they only took 16-year-olds. With me, it was a fluke, it was an accident that I was taken and I went in my mom's place. As I say, sometimes when I think about it, if my mom had not survived, I don't think I could live with myself to know that I survived so she could die. I mean, how does one survive that? So I was, in that respect, very, very lucky. Also, of course, there were very few survivors that survived with a mother or a sister or a brother. And Helen says, yeah, that's true. So you had to be lucky. You had to, at the time we did not consider it being luck. I know that when I was liberated in April 15, 1945 by the British in a terrible concentration camp, Bergen-Belsen, I felt that I lost out again, that I should not have survived, that I should not have lived, because there was nothing to live for. I mean, we lived for the day. I lived for the day when I'll be liberated. But I became liberated and there was nothing to live for. My father was killed, my sisters were killed, my grandparents were killed. Everybody was killed. My mother was the only one that survived. And I felt that it was bad enough to survive all this, to live through it, rather to live through it. But to survive this, I mean, what do I need to live for? There's nothing to live for. I lost 6 years of formal education. I had only completed 3 grades, elementary school, 3 grades, when the war broke out. I was in the 3rd completed third grade. First, second, and third, we did not have kindergarten. There was nothing I didn't find, but I have to, since I speak about education, I did finish college here in the United States. I had two children at the time when I enrolled in college. I finished high school in Sweden. I lived in Sweden after liberation because I had tuberculosis. I was liberated, I had typhoid fever, and I had typhus before, but this was typhoid fever, and tuberculosis. And I was told by a woman that knew, she was visiting England, and in London they have a war museum, and there is a letter, and she told me about it, that there is a letter where from the British people to those who helped in Bergen-Belsen, that they cannot save everyone in Bergen-Belsen. There was an enormous amount of people in Bergen-Belsen after we were liberated who died because help came too late. Something like 18 or 19,000. They were told that anyone in Bergen-Belsen after liberation who has two ailments, they can't save everybody, so they have to pick the most possible cases that will survive. And those would be, everybody was starved, so that was one strike against everybody. So starvation was one. And the second, and they would have just one other ailment. If they had any more, just leave them alone. Put a bracelet on their hand that signifies where they are from, what country, and that's it. And they put a bracelet on my arm because I was suffering from starvation, and as far as they knew, I was suffering also from typhoid fever. What they did not know is that I also had tuberculosis. Now, if they knew, I would have not been given a chance to survive. So, it took a lot of lucky incidents and that concerns every survivor. There had to be something. So many did not survive. So many did not make it. So one that did had a lot of help from total strangers. When I was on the march to Bergen-Belsen from another camp in January in winter, it was so cold, and we had no warm clothing. We didn't have any boots. We didn't have all the things that you need. And especially when we came to Bergen-Belsen, we were given showers. And by that time, we already heard about the showers in Auschwitz, where instead of water, gas came out and killed people. So, but by that time also, we were not so much interested in life anymore, so it didn't seem to matter as much. But we had to get undressed, get into that room, but it was water that came out. But that was January 23rd, I believe, very, very cold. And then without towels, and most people had their heads shaven in Auschwitz, but I was not in Auschwitz. And I had thick, long hair, soaking wet. I almost had icicles forming on my head from all that water and air. Practically naked, barefoot, only ice and snow outside of the room where we did get water. And a totally strange woman came over to me. I've never seen her in my life before, and brought me a scarf, a cotton scarf, and you could see it's like a square piece of material, and someone hemmed it, on all four sides. And she gave me that scarf, and she said, keep that on your head all the time. Never separate from that scarf, which I did. And only one time I took it off. And I was in the, my mother was a registered nurse, surgical. She was a surgical nurse. And she worked helping people, and they had in Bergen-Belsen, in the camp, they had a first aid station. And the woman who was in charge of the women's camp was Dr. Bimkov. She was a dentist. She came to the barrack and asked if there were any nurses or doctors. Well, nurses and doctors in the camps before were shot because the Nazis did not want us to have professional help. So no one would come forward. But someone told this woman that my mother was a surgical nurse, and she took her out, and my mom would not go unless I went with her. She says, what am I going to do with her? You know, I was only 15 years old at that time. So they put me in a barrack that was supposed to be like a hospital. But as soon as there were enough people in the hospital, sick enough, they would take them to kill them. So that was not good either, to be in the hospital. So Dr. Bimko, the head of Bergen-Belsen women's group, assigned me as her messenger. So I became a messenger. And she sent me, there was all kinds of things to do. And one of them was to deliver headache medicine, maybe aspirin or whatever, to the guards, to the German guards that were in the, on the guard tower, right, in the guard tower. And the others were shooting at me. I missed a bullet about this much. I ran into another barrack, and the bullet hit the door, wood, instead of me. So no matter what you did, you were in constant danger for your life. But of course, disease and starvation were the biggest enemies in the camp. So after I was in the first camp, and by the way, working with this poison gas that was poured into these rockets or bombs, and standing there and mixing it for 12 hours, my skin turned yellow, totally yellow, and the hair kind of orangey yellow. It was very hard to recognize you. But then I was sent to another camp, and I saw my mom in that other camp. And of course I ran to her, I recognized her, though she was thin, but she looked the same to me. And she was pushing me away. And then when my youngest son was 10 years old, my mom was telling him about our reunion, my mom's and my reunion. And she's telling me, and this old woman that looked like she could be my mother was running and trying to hug me and calling me mamushu, which is mommy, in Polish. And I was flabbergasted. I said, what? I was only 14 years old. How can that be? I looked like I was an old woman at the age of 14. So you can just imagine what conditions can do to a human being. But once I was with my mother, life was much, much better for me. And it was a much better camp. In 1944, the camps there were closed because the Russians were taking over or coming forward toward what for them it would be going east, right, west, you're right, going west, yeah. So they had to move, and they moved us to other ammunition factory camps that were in a city called Częstochowa, which is a very famous, well-known city in Poland. And we worked there in ammunition factories or on farms, which I worked on farms. And in January of 1945, we were again taken from there and taken to Bergen-Belsen camp, but we didn't know we were going there. The train station was very far from the camp, so we were on this death march. And many people did not make it. It was very, very cold, high snow. Many people didn't even have shoes to walk in that snow. And if anybody was too tired and just sat down, they just shot them on the way. But we did survive and came to the United States. Well, first I came from there because I had tuberculosis. I was taken under the auspices of International Red Cross to Sweden. And I was in Germany first for 4 months in a hospital after the war. And then in Sweden for 3 more months in a hospital. And then sent to a boarding school. I had lost so much formal education that the International Red Cross and a Zionist organization, some organization, helped to open up boarding schools so that we could study, those children that survived, could study in their mother language, so we would not lose. If they put me in a Swedish school, I would lose a lot of time because I did not know Swedish. And that goes for everyone like me. So they opened these boarding schools with the language of instruction of your mother tongue. So I studied in Polish while I was in Sweden until I knew enough Swedish to go to a Swedish school. Both my mom and I, my mom worked as a nurse, and she was even offered any education I would want. If I wanted to be a doctor, if I wanted to be anything, they would pay for it if my mom would agree for us to remain in Sweden. But we had no family in Sweden. We had no friends from before, and so decided to come either to the United States or at the time in 1948 when Israel became a state. I had some cousins that moved there. So it was my mother's decision that whoever would send us papers to come to either Israel or the United States, where we had my father's sister, her husband, and 6 children lived in New York, or around New York City. And my mother's aunt, my grandmother's sister, lived in Baltimore. So we came to Baltimore. We do want to thank you for being here, and I hope that you have learned something about other families. There's so many millions. We're talking about millions who have no one to speak for them. So I'm speaking on behalf of all of them.